Hey everybody, this is Jason with the Landlord Launch. I want to welcome you to our landlord workshop on the rental screening criteria. So today what we're going to be doing in this video is taking a deep dive look at the screening criteria, why it's important, the actual kind of components of that, some different ways to look at that, some different things you can do for yourself, and with the main goal of having this tool and this workshop help you develop your own and be able to put it into practice and to play today in your own business and your own landlording practices. So let's talk about the rental screening criteria and why, in my opinion, is so important. So I think first and foremost, the rental screening criteria, the purpose of it is to define what we're looking for in a rental application. It allows us to spell out all of our expectations. And this helps us in a lot of different areas, which you'll see as we go. But I kind of liken this to a job description in that if you, as an employer, are looking for an accountant, you don't want a plumber applying, right? I mean, you put the job description out there, saying, hey, I am looking for this person. I want them to have this much experience. This is kind of the pay range. These are the educational credentials I want you to have. Please apply if this fits you. In the same respect, that's kind of what the screening criteria does. It says, hey, the application that I will approve needs to have this much income, needs to have this much in credit score, needs to not be in bankruptcy, needs to have these animals or not these animals or whatever it is. But again, it outlines all of the things that you want and need and that you're going to be looking at as part of your screening process to approve or potentially deny that rental application. A second thing this does is it is a great place to communicate information about the screening process itself. So application fee, how long it's going to take, what are the requirements, for accepting a rental application from the applicant, from a potential tenant. I think it's a great place to outline that stuff so everybody's on the same page. I also like to include this in my practice as part of my application packet. So I include this with my rental application and a property information sheet too. That's a different topic, but I have them sign it. That way they are indicating that they know exactly what those terms are. They've read them, they reviewed to them, they agreed to them. They think by paying the application fee and putting the deposit down or whatever, that they'll pass. That's what they're indicating, that they understand it. And then if they don't, if they see on the screening criteria that they have to make a certain amount of money, they pay the application fee, and they don't make that money, well, then that's on them. They agreed to it. You were very clear up front. Just because they were not honest with you doesn't mean that you should approve that application anyway. So that's another reason I really like it. It simplifies the decision-making process too. And what I mean by that is when you get into the screening process, I like to use a screening checklist, and those screening checklists actually mirrors a lot of what's on the screening criteria. But let's just say that you go down that list of everything you're looking for. Do they make the income that your screening criteria says they need to make? Yes? Okay. They checked off that box. They passed. They meet that criteria. Do they have positive rental history? The credit score of such and such. Do they have animals, or yes or no? Check. Meets. If they meet everything, guess what? They're approved. Simple. Very clear cut. It takes kind of the emotion out of it and everything else. It's very factual based. You're collecting the information. If they meet everything on your criteria, then they're approved. And if they don't, then they're denied. And that leads me to kind of well, there's a lot of reasons why this is important, but one of the main points I like to point out in terms of why this is important is protection against fair housing claims, discrimination. So let's say a single mother says, hey, this landlord denied me because I have a child. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to say, okay, well, no, here is my criteria. This is what you signed off on. You filled out your application, and in the screening process, I found that you do not meet A, B, and C. Those are the reasons I denied you. It had nothing to do with the fact that you're a single mother or part of any protected class, whatever that may be. It's a layer of protection against a fair housing complaint, and it allows you to document your logic and your process for screening, and allows to also show, especially if you follow this consistently, that you apply the same criteria to everybody who has applied for your home, and the same screening criteria as well. So it's again, protection against fair housing by showing that you are just going down the list, and that discrimination truly isn't part of your decision-making process. The fact that they did not meet 3 or 4 components of your criteria, it's a denial. It's very, very clean. So those are the reasons that I think they're most important for. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of uses for this thing, but those are the big ones. That's why I think it's such a beneficial deal. I talk about the screening criteria all the time in the application process and the marketing and the screening process, all of those things. So having said that, let's go on and get started. We're going to take a deep dive into the screening process, or the rental criterion information sheet here, and show you what mine looks like, some of the different ways we can use this, some of the ways you can use this for yourself, and then again, when this is all said and done, whether you're working on this in real time as we're going through this workshop, or if you wait till you're after we're done and download this and get to working on it, your assignment today is to download the resource, start making this your own, and apply it today. That's why you're here, to take action. And this is one of, in my opinion, one of the most important things a landlord can do, because it's right at the beginning of the relationship, and it sets the pace for everything else that's to come in terms of the processes that we go through in the management cycle. So here we go. Let's jump right into the rental criterion information sheet. So this first section, this application information, this is where we get to start communicating some information about the application process itself. And see, the first line here is it outlines the application fee. Now, I've seen application fees all over the place, anywhere from $50 to as much as $100, $110, $115. The higher application fee, the more restrictive it becomes. The application fee should be something that is put in place to cover the costs of not only your background check, but your time for doing the rental verifications, for collecting all that documentation, and that as well. So cover your costs. Find that sweet spot for you and cover your costs. Now, I like to put, you'll see here it says per adult. I like to put per adult in there because one of the things I ran into when I used to do, like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like something like in the early days, $25, $35, $45 per person, or $60 for a married couple. And what I ended up having to deal with was a lot of people saying, well, we've been together for 10 years, it's common law marriage, or there's this situation or there's that situation. And when we start getting into things that are gray like that, especially here, I don't like it more than anything, because fair housing, and keep in mind that a lot of my experience comes from being a property management owner and working in the multifamily industry, and working with larger numbers of clients and properties. So I've been more exposed to fair housing issues than, say, somebody just owns a single family home. So this is always first and front on my mind. But what that does is it makes things a little gray, and I don't like to play in the gray area, because if you do it for one person, then theoretically from that point forward you should do it for everybody. And by changing this to whatever it was, here it says $65 per adult, it's clean, it's simple, it doesn't get, we're married, okay, great, it's gonna be 2 application fees, you're both adults. I never charged kids, of course, they're dependents, and you don't lease to kids, because I think for the most part that if they are under 18, that the contract's not, you can't sign a valid contract with them anyway, or at least it won't hold up in court. Let's see here, what else we have? We have applications cannot be processed until we receive a completed rental application and the application fee. So to me, this is important because it outlines what a a completed application actually is. And let me give you an example. Let's say I see this question all the time. I held a little open house and we received 4 rental applications. Which one do I choose? Should I screen them all and pick the best? The answer to that is no, don't do that. That's a fair housing nightmare as well. What we do is first come, first serve. And the best way you do the first come and first serve is set the criteria on what that looks like. A completed rental application, the one that you're going to screen, and that's what this speaks to, is that I have to have a signed rental application by all adults that are going to potentially live in a home, and it has to be accompanied by a paid application fee for each application. Now, in the past, I've also required something like a half-month security deposit, and that was refundable, of course, to them. But what that did was saying, okay, you give me the application, you give me the application fee, and you give me a half-month's rent, and I'm going to take that unit off of the market for you until the screening process is over. And so the point being, is a standard, is a clear-cut definition, and what that kept us from doing, especially as a management company where we got a lot of volume, where it helped us at is when 2 or 3 people would look at a home in a day, and the last person of the day gave us everything we needed, the application fee, and the deposit. And then later on that day, the very first person would come in and be like, hey, I looked at your home earlier, I'm going to put this stuff in. I'm sorry, we already rented it. But I looked at it first. Yeah, but this is our screening criteria. If you want to put this in and be second up, if this one doesn't come through, then great. But that allowed us to establish a very clear-cut line of what application we are going to accept in our process. And that's why it's listed out in here, because again, I'm communicating that information about the application process to the potential applicants, tenants, residents, whatever you want to call them. I outline here how long it generally takes for our screening process, because if nothing else, that's always a question. And more annoyingly is if you tell them, if it's not listed here, and you tell them that, oh yeah, it's going to be 24 hours, 48 hours, or the question, the calls, 5 hours later, hey, I just want to check on my application. I got those too, but try to eliminate those by telling them, hey, listen, if everything goes smoothly, it's going to be 24 to 48 hours. You'll hear from us, and if there's things we need more information on, then we're going to call and we're going to ask you more about this application and get what we need to go on and move forward. I outline in here that our application fees are non-refundable. The application fee, again, is to cover the cost of you screening an applicant. It's not to hold the unit. It's not something that's refundable. It's saying, hey, I'm going to pay for a background check, and we are going to invest time into doing this so that you're paying for that service. And if everything is good on your screening criteria, you signed off on the screening criteria. If everything is good there, then you have nothing to worry about anyway. You'll be approved. Now, I do recommend that you only accept certified funds or cash if and when you can. Credit card charges can be disputed. Checks can be stopped. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, there are some, in today's age of digital payments, some that could be a little bit more difficult, but I mean, if you do like a Cash App or Venmo, something like that, that's okay too. They can, at least then they can't dispute it and take it back from you. I think they can with certain PayPal apps. So just watch out for their ability to stop that charge, because we used to deal with it all the time before we put these measures in place. As a matter of fact, this is why we put the measures in place, is because I don't know how many people would dispute a credit card charge once they got denied, or stop a check once they got denied, and we had money and time invested in it, so we just wanted it to stop. Now let's see here, and any other thing, we touched on it earlier, all leasees must be 18 years of age, and the reason for that is because you have to be 18 years old to be able to consent and enter into a legal contract. Now, if your area has something specifically different to that, then go with the laws and ordinances in your area. But everywhere I've ever worked, that's been the case. So just being very clear here, because we do have people that are 16 and 17 who may have left the home and are out on their own or working on their emancipation or whatever else, and we can't lease to them because we can't enforce that contract legally. So that's the application information section. Now, if you have other things going on, terms about your process that you want to communicate, it's a great place to put it. But I think this covers the major components of it, the application fee, how long, non-refundable, how old do you have to be, and all those types of things. So the next section we're going to get into here is the security deposits. Let me just kind of scroll this up a little bit. Now, this is one of those areas where it's going to be different probably in every state what you can and can't charge. You're gonna have to know your specific laws for the areas that you're in. This one here would be when this sample is really based off one I used on a Kansas property. And so for us in Kansas, we could charge up to 1 month's rent on the security deposit. And so that's what I put on there. The security deposit amount equal to 1 month's rent is required to reserve a home during the application screening process. Matter of fact, what I was talking about earlier, it looks like this was one of those terms of the application. You remember how I said that application fee, application, and maybe sometimes a half-month security deposit? Well, on this particular one, I've outlined that I want the full month security deposit before we run our application. So of course, that's refundable. If they get denied, you have to refund the security deposit. And then just make sure it's even legal to do that as well. Everywhere I've worked, it has been. But again, there's all kinds of different laws regarding security deposits. Usually, those are outlined in your state residential landlord tenant act. Sometimes your cities, or I don't know about counties, but definitely cities can have more restrictive, landlord tenant laws, ordinances, things along those lines. Let's see here. In there, we outline security deposit is refundable in the event the application cannot be approved. Now, one thing that I did that, to be quite honest with you, we were never actually challenged on it. So typically, on a security deposit, I think kind of that threshold is that you can retain the security deposit if you can show that damages were basically caused. It was always our contention that if you moved under the pretense that you were going to move in and you waited 3 weeks or 4 weeks and we kept that rental home off of the market for you and then you backed out the last minute, it was always my contention that damages have been caused. We now have lost a month's worth of rent. We could have been marketing it. It could have been leased, and therefore we wanted compensated for that time lost. Now, on the rental screening criteria I outline here, upon approval, the applicant will have 72 hours from notification of approval to cancel and receive a full refund. If the applicant cancels after the 72-hour period, the security deposit will be forfeit. All cancellations must be in writing. Now, as part of the application packet, our application packet, I actually had a separate security deposit policy that outlined this, and they signed this. Again, I never had a single one of these challenged. Now, the way that I use this, if it was 5 days later or a week later or something drastic happened, a split or a death or a loss of a job, don't be a jerk. Just give the deposit back, move on. It's not worth the fight. Be a decent kind of human being about it. Be human about it. What this was really for was to protect us from those folks that a month went by and they decided to just change their mind and they just didn't move in. That's where this really came into play. And to be quite honest with you, I didn't actually collect very many of these because it was an effective enough deterrent that people that kind of played that game, and for whatever reasons, there's people out there that do that, but the people that kind of played that game, they kind of understood what was going to happen and they didn't want to lose their rent if they changed their mind. So the ones that were kind of naturally flighty, they just wouldn't apply. They would see that and be like, no, that doesn't, I'm not comfortable with that. Okay, good. Let us know if something changes. But again, it was to recoup the damages of lost rent and marketing and everything else if they decided to back out at the last minute. Now, another thing I put in here that this one is kind of a touch and go. I actually wouldn't use this today. This says additional security deposit may be required based on the results obtained from the screening process. Now, let's just say that everything else looks good. Like everything else looks good. But they had an eviction 3 years ago. They've had positive rental since then. They have a good job now. There was a decent reason for that, and you want to make an exception. That's the only thing. That's where something like this would come into play. You would say, okay, listen, you don't really meet because you've had an eviction in the last 5 years, if that is your criteria. What we're going to do is we're going to require a little extra deposit. First off, I couldn't do it in Kansas anyway because the most you can do is 1 month's rent. But if you are able to do more, that may be something you could do. Now, the catch is, though, is that if that is going to be your standard, you have to apply it across the board. Everybody in that situation, you have to give the same opportunity, give the same amount. And the reason I wouldn't do it is because over the course of time, 2, 3, 4 years, it's very easy to start losing track of what you did for who and when and all that stuff. But I slapped it in there, I think, more than anything, just to show as, one way that you could potentially utilize something like this for, if you wanted to keep some flexibility on what kind of options that you want to have in terms of approving an application. Me personally, I'm a very you either meet or you don't meet type of person. I don't like having the options. I don't like having the flexibility. It's not that I don't care. It's just it always seems like I get burnt on them. So I'm just a very black and white guy, and yeah, I feel for the person that has a great story, but like I said, every time I hear a great story, that's all it really is, a great story, and I end up, getting a short end on that one. But hey, it's worth knowing, it's worth thinking about, and if you're one of those people that like to have some of the options or whatever else, this is a way that you could potentially do that while still staying compliant with fair housing and being consistent, from applicant to applicant. Okay, rental history. Now, the rental history, this is... I don't want to say, it's a little bit subjective. So let me just go through the terms, and then there's some things on here that I kind of watch out for when I'm screening. So 3 years of rental history is required. Okay. Previous housing on rental property must provide a good reference. No balance may be left outstanding to any previous landlord. It's a big no-no. Sufficient notice must be given. Applicants in the process of an eviction will be denied. So, because, why would you want to rent to somebody that's in the middle of getting evicted? Okay, so this one, again, if you wanted to, there's some areas where you could build in some exceptions. If you did that, though, I would highly recommend that you outline them right here. So 3 years rental history required. What if this is their first home? What if they've lived with their parents? What if they lived with their parents all through college and, they held down a job while they're in college, they have great credit and everything else, an exception. Maybe that's something you want to build in. Maybe that's one of those deals where, for an extra security deposit, for people in a situation, you'll take a chance on them, but whatever it is, define it the best that you can and keep it consistent from application to application. Previous housing on rental property must provide a good reference. Now, one of the things that I ran into in the screening process that I think everybody should be aware of, because it does happen, is that sometimes, especially for folks that are trying to hide bad rental references, is that they will list a landlord's name as somebody they know. And they'll put the address down and everything, so when it shows up on the credit report, the address matches, but if you call that the landlord that's on the application, it's somebody they know and they provide a good reference, and they get around the system. So one of the things that I always like to kind of do is just jump on the county appraiser site, and it's whatever county you're in. In Kansas, for me, is Shawnee County Appraiser website, and you can actually see whose name is on the tax record. And you would be surprised how many times I would find that the landlord's name they listed did not match the name on the tax record. And sure enough, that's what they're trying to do. Application got denied. See you later. So that's just one thing I kind of wanted to point out there on the good references. That stuff does happen. It's something to be aware of, and it's a quick and easy check too. It takes 3 minutes. So I would highly recommend doing something like that. No balance left to any previous landlord. This is one specifically that we did if everything else was good, and this was the only thing on there, and it was, I don't remember exactly how long we looked at it, but whether it's 3 years old or 5 years or older, and there was still a balance and everything has been good and we're looking for that exception, then what we allowed people to do, we would let them go pay that landlord off in full and provide a letter that balance was taken care of, and then we would let them in. We would make an exception for that. But again, for fair housing purposes, it was consistent. Everybody had that opportunity. And again, I can't remember exactly what it was. It's been a while, since I was in the application process for that company how we did that. But it was either like any balances over 3 years old or 5 years. There was some sort of set line drawn, and anything beyond that was considered something they could cure, basically, as long as everything else was good from that time moving forward. Because hey, let's face it, good things happen, bad things happen to good people, and sometimes we get in a rut, and sometimes things happen that we have to work through, and it doesn't always turn out the best, but if there is a willingness to make it right and everything else is good, sometimes it's okay to give them a shot. But again, if you do that, do it in a consistent manner and be prepared for if that person that maybe you don't feel the wildest about, but they've checked all the boxes, and this would be the reason you would deny them. But now, since you've done it for 2-3 other people, you have to do it for them too, regardless of how you're kind of feeling about the situation, because again, fair housing, consistency, doing the same thing for everybody across the board. That's a big theme in property management. If you want to protect yourself, treat everybody equally. Apply the same standards to everybody, basically. Okay, so sufficient notice should be given. Again, if they haven't given 30-day notice, and when you do that rental reference, make sure their rent's paid. Even if they've given so a lot of times what'll happen, as I kind of stutter through this, a lot of times what'll happen with the management company, especially in apartment communities, is if that resident hasn't given notice, they won't even give a rental verification. They'll say, that person hasn't given notice, I'm sorry, I can't give you any information. But it's always a red flag to me for somebody that's looking for a place to live and wants to move in 2 to 3 weeks, and they haven't given notice. 9 times out of 10, they probably owe that rent, or something is happening there, or they may be at the beginning steps of an eviction. So it's just like a red flag deal, and that's why I have that thrown in there. And then, of course, we've touched on this. Applicants in the process of an eviction will be denied. Now, you can look at this like on the public court records, if those are available in your area. If those type of records are available in your areas, you can see when these actions are started. I've been hearing some crazy stories. I think one was from New York, and I think it's happening in other areas, where tenants are now starting to be able to get attorneys or file motions to have the eviction kind of hidden from the record, because it will impact their ability to find housing in the future, which I think is crazy, because that's the whole point of evicting, is to get them out of your home and to let other landlords know that this person has not paid rent. But hey, it is what it is. That's what landlords in those areas are dealing with. So at the very least, it's something to be aware of. But if in your area that's still the case, and you can find out, most likely the public, the public court website will be able to show that. Some of the screening reports actually have eviction reports as well, but usually I think by the time they're on there, the eviction's already been processed. They don't really, the ones I've seen, they don't really tell you which ones are like new and in motion, because they've been filed, but they haven't been finalized, so they don't show up on those screening reports, at least the ones I've seen. So yeah, okay, so that's what I have kind of for the rental history here. Let's move on to our occupancy standards. Now, this is pretty cut and dry. Generally speaking, and there's a little bit of caveat to this. Generally speaking, 2 people per bedroom. You see, okay, so let me back up. When you read the HUD documentation on what is reasonable for occupancy standards, it doesn't necessarily give you a clear-cut answer. It just uses the word reasonable. So having said that, I have found and I have seen that 2 people, not 2 adults, but 2 people per bedroom is a reasonable standard to have. Now, one of the things that you have to watch out for is that does not include an unborn baby. If you know that, let's just say it's a 1-bedroom apartment and you have 2 people per bedroom and you know that person's pregnant, do not deny for that. As a matter of fact, anything under, I think I got under here the age of 1, but I think really, I would say maybe even as far as 2 these days, because I mean, when I was using this, that a lot of things have changed. So I would say in some areas where things are a little more, I'll just say pro-tenant, a little more flexible on that side, I think you need to adjust as a landlord to be flexible too, because it's not about, I used to, when I first got in, I would be like, oh, that's not right, they shouldn't be able to do that, this is my house, I should be able to do what I need to do with this house. Well, if you're a landlord, guess what? This is just stuff that's part of the business. We're going to have to deal with it. So, the sooner we're able to get over that and just move past it, the better off you'll be. It'll be less stress, less headaches on you. And so I would say anywhere 1 to 2 years and under, don't really push that. They start getting 3, 4, 5 years old, then yeah, that would be an extra person. And you definitely don't want to allow somebody that has 5 people living in a studio apartment. That's not what we're trying to do here. Now, funny enough, I list this out here as well, so because you could say 2 persons per bedroom, but it's funny how many people won't understand that. So I actually just list it out on this one, and this is just a personal preference. You don't have to do this, but I list it out: 1 bedroom, 2 persons, 2 bedrooms, 4 persons. It's very clear. There's no issues here. And then if somebody says, most times people aren't going to say I'm pregnant, does that count? That's not gonna really be an issue. But if they were, you're like, no, that's okay. That it's not the baby's not a person. It's that in terms of the occupancy standards, that's okay. We're not going to look at that right now. This is what we're looking at. So that's what I have on the occupancy standards in terms of our screening criteria. Okay, animals and fees. So let me say this first. If somebody approaches you and says, I have an emotional support animal, fees and rules, pretty much can't charge them. You have to be prepared to let those go out the window. So if that's the case, I highly recommend that you have a reasonable accommodation process and policy in place, in writing. Figure it out ahead of time. We have a great workshop on this as well that covers ESAs and how to deal with it, and all the documents and the paperwork you need to make sure that you're covered. But just a quick snapshot of that is, 1, have that in writing, pull that out, follow that process every single time with every person. Part of that process is going to be asking them to complete a reasonable accommodation request form. Part of that process is going to be obtaining the proper documentation, and depending whether it's an ESA or a service animal, that documentation can be different. And then if they are approved, because you can deny people with an ESA if they do not meet certain criteria. Be careful with it, but it is doable. If they're approved, then I highly recommend you use what I call an animal agreement or an animal lease. I try to stay, it's habit, but I try to stay away from the term pets these days because they're not pets. They are considered a medical device at this point. So, as you see on here, I don't think I have pet. I think I got it all out of there, but I really refer to animals and fees here. So this is assuming no ESA or service animal, assistance animal type scenario. This is just what is your standards on animals. And if you accept animals, let's do the easy one. If you don't accept animals, just say animals are not allowed. We don't accept animals at this property. If they are, then define your terms of what that means. What are your guidelines? What are you willing to accept? What are you not willing to accept? So here I'm saying there is a 2 animal maximum. We don't want any more than 2 animals. Maybe you don't want any more than 1 animal. Maybe you don't care. On a side note, there are certain states and like cities and municipalities that you cannot deny an animal because that is now a protected class. If you try to deny an animal, it is considered discrimination. So again, know your local laws. But back to this, assuming that you can. Second one, there's a 20-pound adult weight per animal maximum. And unfortunately, once again, if there's a way to abuse and try to get around the system, someone's going to try. And the reason this is in place is because I would literally have somebody bring in a Great Dane puppy and say they're under your 30-pound weight limit. No, they're 2 months old. This thing's going to be a 90-pound dog or whatever they end up getting. That's not going to work. But they would try to argue that point with me. So again, it was very simple for me just to cut that off. 20 pounds adult weight per animal maximum. And that covers most of your small dogs and cats. There is a $200 non-refundable fee per animal and a monthly charge of $20 per month per animal. Now, not everybody can charge non-refundable fees. Not everybody can charge animal monthly charges either. So once again, know what you can and can't do in the vicinity that you're located at. But if that's what you want to do and that's what you can do, outline it here. They're looking at this on the front end before they apply. Give them all the information they need so that they can make a decision on whether or not they want to apply. And then if they get denied, let's just say that as part of your screening process, you require veterinary records. Shots are up to date, so forth, and you have a 20-pound limit, and then all of a sudden you're getting back a golden retriever, medical records for a golden retriever who's 65 pounds. Well, now you're going to deny that application because your criteria is 20 pounds adult weight per animal, and they have an animal that exceeds that by 3 times. Sorry, your application's denied. So that's why it's very good to define whatever the conditions that you are requiring for your property. Breed restrictions. Okay, some of these I threw some common ones that I've seen in here. Some people will debate these all day long, and I will debate some of them. Great Dane's one of the I have never had a problem with a Great Dane. The gentle giant couldn't be more of a better description in my experience, but I have seen them on there. I think sometimes the size just scares people. But these are some animals that I have seen on breed restrictions. And again, if you have certain restrictions that you don't want certain animals in there, you can list them out here. I think these days, to be quite honest with you, I would do it more through weight restrictions and stuff along those lines as opposed to actual breeds. Because, I don't know. I guess for me, anytime I can eliminate an argument, and I'll have somebody all day long argue with me about how gentle their pit bull is and how it's a bad rap and how it's not fair and all these other things. It's just not an argument I want to get in. Maybe I agree with them, maybe I don't. But it's pointless for what we're trying to do here. If I don't want a pit bull, if I don't want a Great Dane, if I don't want an Akita, fine. If I put a 20-pound limit in, it eliminates it altogether. It just eliminates argument, and I don't want to argue with a potential applicant about the qualities of their dog. I'm sure their dog is amazing. I just don't want a dog of that size in my property. And then I also tell them that there is going to be an animal agreement required as part of the lease here, just so they're aware, so they know. And that what that does is it sets them up to say, hey, I got rules and regulations and policies in place. If you're going to bring an animal into my home, there's going to be some guidelines that you're going to have to follow. So setting that all up. Now, again, like I said, know your laws, know your area, know what you can and can't do, know if, restricting animals is considered discrimination where you're at, know what you can do on your charges, and then eliminate any potential area for arguments because people are passionate about their animals. And if you don't want animals, no animals. Simple. Income requirements. Now, my general rule of thumb for income requirements has always been 3 times a monthly rent, gross monthly rent, or you have to make gross the 3 times the amount of rent. So if your rent is $1,000, then your gross paycheck the household income for a month needs to be $3,000 or greater. With apartments, I've always set this at 2.5 times, not 3. And the main reason is the utilities. That extra half month's rent, it always seemed effective when it come to, because houses are more expensive in terms of you have more utilities to pay. A lot of times with apartment communities, at least back then, this is changing, especially in a lot of the major markets where you're charging 100% of everything back. A lot of the apartments I worked with up here in the greater Phoenix area, I mean, they're rubs is what they're called, but we charge everything back, and we would get, even if they were commonly metered, we would figure out what the water bill was, and we'd split that evenly across the entire community, or we'd meter them separately ourselves. And in some cases, it began becoming a little bit of a profit center to a certain degree, because there would be administrative fees tacked onto them. But for our purposes, general rules of thumb: single family home, 3 times the amount of rent's pretty good. If you have an apartment or something where you pay some of the utilities, 2.5 times the rent is pretty good. I always require that they give me their most recent paycheck stub. And then, just because it's an easy way to verify, if they can give me 2 paycheck stubs, most recent ones, is an easy way for me to calculate. I use it to calculate the income. That's what it's more about. I also lay out a few things, because people do relocate, people do move and then have to change jobs, or in the middle of whatever else. I accept employment offer letters. An offer letter has to say this person starting on this date, their salary is going to be such and such date. I mean, heck, I relocated from Kansas here, to the Phoenix area, and when we were buying a house, and I had to provide my offer letter part of our mortgage. So they are legitimate. There is a use for them. So just kind of keep that in place. The other thing that you can do here when you're verifying income is use employment verification form. If you want to do it verbally and just jot all the information down on a form, that's great. But whatever that is, that's more on the screening process itself, but that's the standard for me: 3 times a monthly rent, 2.5 times a monthly rent, and then you have to give me at least 1 paycheck stub, your most recent paycheck stub. Unless it's a new job, give me your offer of employment, your income letter. Credit. Okay, so credit. A lot of times people will list an actual credit score down, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that at all. The only thing is make sure you know what kind of background check that you're using, your credit check, because a lot of the credit reporting services these days, they're not necessarily using the typical FICO score. I still like to see a FICO score. What they will use is like a rental score or some sort of tenant quality score, something along those lines. And it's a combination of some different factors, and then you get a score. My problem is a lot of those times when they do that, there's not a real good definition of what that actually means. I mean, personally, I kind of understand that, a 500 credit score, 550, 600 and below really is a pretty rough score. Fairly average is 600 to 700. You're breaching 700, 800, you're in really good shape. That's a good credit score. I just don't always understand the scores. But if you use the same company over and over and over, and they use the tenant score and you understand it, one thing I look at is the ranges. So if I can't get the exact terms of what that tenant score is comprised of, I'll be like, okay, well, what's the tenant score range? And sometimes it'll be 0 to 800 or 500 to 700 or whatever it may be. And then at least then I can kind of get a feel for where that score really comes in and say, okay, I want anybody above this line is good. But whatever you pick, stick to it. If 660 is it, then it's 660 and above. Not 640, not 620, not 600, 660 and above. Pick the thing that you are willing to accept at the lowest level and then go with it. The other thing I really stress here is, well, let me jump back a little bit. The second thing, I don't have a credit score. The thing I have listed on here is credit history must be rated positive with no judgments from previous landlords. This goes back to that kind of responsibility. If you jack over another landlord, the likelihood that you're going to jack me over is high. If it's been 3-5 years, if you're young and dumb, if it was a divorce, things along those lines, that's where I have those exceptions kind of built in. And I get it. Everything else has been good. It looks like you're taking responsibility for your life. Hey, I get it. Let me take a chance on you, but we're going to have a little safety built in if that's possible. But for me, if they owe another landlord, if they haven't done another landlord, if they destroyed another landlord's home, and it's been any time recent, I'm just not interested. I mean, past behavior is a great indicator of future behavior. I don't want any of those things to happen to me in my home. So that's why I kind of line that out. And it's even, I'm usually pretty cut and dry on a lot of this stuff, but it's even kind of left a little bit vague. But I think for the most part, positive history and no judgments from previous landlords. I kind of take that back. That's fairly clear cut. I mean, there's not a lot of gray there. I mean, you either have a judgment or you don't. Landlord either gave you a good reference or they didn't, those types of things. Here's an important one though, bankruptcy. Bankruptcy for me, it has to be discharged. There's two types of bankruptcy you'll most likely be dealing with, Chapter 7, Chapter 13. Chapter 7 is where they liquidate everything, they discharge it. It's anywhere from 90 to 180 days from start to finish, and then it's usually over. The other very popular one is a Chapter 13, and that's the one where they go and they stop all your creditors from being able to call you and harass you for payments. The courts and the trustee decide how much you're going to have to pay back, and then from there they tell those creditors, okay, well, they may owe you $10,000, but we're only going to make them pay you back $3,000. And by the way, they're going to pay us every month, and then we're going to give you the portion of the amount that we decide to give you. And then when this is over, you don't get to come after anymore. We're going to wipe it off, and sorry, you're just going to have to write this expense off. That's the Chapter 13. The problem with the Chapter 13 for me is that it doesn't discharge until it's all over. So if it's a 3 or a 5 year payment plan, it's technically an open bankruptcy that entire time. And what I have experienced in the past, and hopefully this has changed, I haven't heard that it is, maybe it is in some places, maybe it's gotten worse, I don't know. But one of the things I've experienced is that the tenant, if they owe you a month or 2 months rent and you're about to evict them, they can then go to their trustee and get that wrapped up into the bankruptcy, and it opens it back up, and they have to pay some more money and they have to do some stuff, but you can get pulled in to the middle of their bankruptcy. And then you're pretty much out that money for the most part. I mean, maybe you get some of it back, but you're going to get it through a very reduced payment plan. And yes, you can get them out. It's a pain and it takes a while, and you're most likely going to lose some more money. But bankruptcies, to me, I mean, think about it. What we're looking for is somebody that wants to pay their bills. They can pay their bills. That's why we have, the ability to. That's why we have certain income requirements, and we want them on the job, and all those types of things. If they're in a bankruptcy or just recently out of a bankruptcy within the last 5 years, that is a pure indication, a very clear indication that in the recent past they are not paying their bills. So why would you want to put yourself in that situation? That's why I have this here. Now, granted, same thing. If things are positive and they turn their life around and the thing's been discharged for 5 years, okay, I'll give them another shot. It takes 7 to 10 years for that really to come off your credit report. But I'll give them another shot. But it's going to there's going to be some terms and conditions there in terms of you have to be discharged for 5 years, and everything else has to look good. You can't run back up a whole bunch more debt, in the process from your discharge to this point either. I mean, because that's another red flag. Because once again, if you filed bankruptcy once, it is a lot easier for you to file it again, at least in your own mind. The kind of the stigma that some people feel about that isn't the same for a lot of people that have filed it and are now back in debt trouble. They're like, well, I've done it once, and this is a good way for me to kind of get that squared up. So be careful of that. Criminal background. This is one you should be careful with. In the past, it was a very general thing for me. It was something along the lines of saying no felony convictions in the last 10 years. Well, The problem is that over time and determinations through HUD, it's kind of been construed as potentially affecting certain races more than others. Disparate impact, I think, is what it's officially called. And so what they said is that you cannot deny somebody for criminal activity that wouldn't affect your home, wouldn't affect other people, or is not say, like for example, arson. Arson, you can deny somebody on for past criminal history because, again, arson can affect the value of your property. I mean, it could have been damage to the property, like major assaults or murder, something along those lines. It's a safety hazard to other people. So those types of things where can potentially affect the home or other people, great. Now this one I actually agree with, but there are DUIs that are felonies. So if you just say 10 years felony and somebody comes with a DUI, well, technically you have to deny them. So what they've basically done is they've said that if you're going to deny based on criminal background, the crime has to be something that could potentially affect your property or other people around your property. So there are some very specific ones that I list out here, and if they don't fall in this, and this isn't 100%, every once in a while I'll run into one and be like, oh shoot, that, I never considered that. This should definitely be off of our list. And then from there I will add it and then do an updated version of it. So arson, vandalism, sexual assault, registered sex offenders, the manufacture, distribution of a controlled substance. Those will all be basis for denial of the application. And I also put on there what we're looking at. The felony convictions will be considered for 10 years from the point of the completion of the sentence. What I have run into in the past is that vague statement got us not necessarily in trouble, but put us in a weird spot, because if I didn't say from the completion of the sentence, what some people would say, well, listen, that happened 15 years ago. You can't deny me based on that. Yeah, but you're in prison for 12 of those 15 years. So, it gets to be a little gray, and I don't like those gray areas. That's why I wanted to cut that out. That's why I said convictions will be considered for 10 years from the point of completion of the sentence. Very specific there. Okay, that is my criminal background. And then you also let me one more thing. Be careful, because there are now certain areas that you just can't use criminal background as a part of your rental criteria. It would be considered discrimination in certain areas to look at their criminal background. It's not widespread. Hopefully it never becomes widespread, because arson and sexual assault and registered sex offenses and all these things, these are serious things that we shouldn't, as landlords, I feel, be forced to have to take. But it is what it is. Just know your laws. Okay. Okay, the final thing I have in the rental criteria is regards to renter's insurance. And I want everybody up front to know that I require renter's insurance. And there's a lot of important reasons for this. I can do a whole workshop on renter's insurance alone. But the important part for what we're talking about today is they're going to be required to have renter's insurance. And even in my lease agreements, one of the things that I will put in there is if they let their renter's insurance lapse, then I'm going to charge them a fee. There are certain policies out there that you can get. I think e-premium is one of them, that if they lapse in their coverage, a landlord can put a policy into place and it will protect the landlord from any damages, but it just doesn't cover the renter's contents and things along those lines. So if they have a kitchen fire, this policy will kind of kick in. The beautiful thing about this is that you can build into your lease that if it lapses, you can charge them a fee. And usually that fee is more expensive than what the renter's insurance would cost them in the first place. So that's one of the reasons I put this in here. So yeah, I also end up putting some sort of information about, a potential policy that they could use, something simple, eliminate e-premium, maybe you have a local insurance person you like to refer business to, stick a flyer in a rental packet or give them the information as part of your move-in packet, I don't know. But those are all things that you can do, and then track it, if you don't have some sort of management software or whatever, put it in your Outlook calendar that this insurance policy expires in April 2024. Maybe put a reminder in February so you can send them a notice saying, hey, your insurance policy is about to expire. Another thing, in the lease and the information is, what's it called? I don't know if it's called being additionally insured or listed as an interested party, but what that does is it allows the insurance company to send you a notification if there's a lapse in that coverage, or if it gets canceled, which I guess same thing. But that's important because if you don't know, then how can you enforce it? So renter's insurance is very important. I highly recommend it if you can require that in your state and your lease. Do. It's very, very, very much worth it. Okay, so very final thing before we kind of wrap up our rental criteria deep dive, and we're coming up here on an hour, so we've gotten some really good information on here, and I think we've covered this extremely well. Hopefully you have everything you need to know to take this, adapt this, make this your own. But is the signature. Like I mentioned before, I have this as part of the rental application packet. This is one of the things they have to sign to be considered a completed application. If you're using a digital application or an online application, there is usually a way to include this kind of in either extra documents or in sometimes you have to copy and paste it in the welcome screen or whatever it is. But 9 times out of 10 you will find a way to be able to include this in part of your online application. And if it just doesn't happen and you don't want to move away from that platform, fine. When you get an application, email this over to them. Say, hey, I need this. I need you to review this and sign this before I can process your application. If they refuse to sign it, give them their money back. See you later. So that's the long way around it if push had to come to shove. So that is it. That is the rental screening application. So again, as you can see, it's everything I said it was. It does everything I said it was going to do. It outlines all of the criteria. It helps us define what we're looking for in an application, and in a certain kind of way, it helps us define the type of tenant that we want for our home too, in terms of what they need to have in place to be considered a qualified applicant. Again, allows us to communicate everything that we have about our application process, our terms, what we're going to charge, the fees, how long it's going to take, what we will or will not accept, all of those things. Again, I really like it because it makes the approval process or denial process extremely easy. I mean, it's just you meet the criteria or you don't, as simple as that. And then finally, it protects us from any potential fair housing claims because it shows that we have the same criteria for everybody who applies for a home. And if you put things like this in process, trust me when I say that if you ever have the unfortunate luck to deal with a fair housing complaint and an investigation, and because the thing is about those things is that even if you're 100% clear, there's still a pain. But trust me when I say that it's a whole heck of a lot easier when you have this stuff built in, because they understand then you have a process, you have your standards in place, and as long as you follow your process and follow your standards, at the end of the day, there's nothing that's going to come out of that. So it's huge when it comes to peace of mind when dealing with those types of things, because again, it's just proof that whatever this person is saying about you is not actually, well, hopefully is not true, as long as you follow your processes. So that's it. That's what I have for the rental screening criteria and information sheet. Again, I hope this has been helpful. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to download this if you haven't already from the resource section here. Again, it should be a Word document, and I want you to start writing out or editing and altering these things and put your own terms in here. And I want you to make this as part of your own rental, part of your own process, your own application. And then every time, if there is a change, I want you to notice down here in the footer, I have revised, this one was revised 6/27/2020 is the last time I updated the sample copy here. Now, if any of these things change for you and you decide you want to start doing things a little different, or your terms are going to change a little different for the positive or for the negative, more restrictive rather, that's okay. What you do is then you have a revision date on here, and if somebody says, well, wait a minute, you did this for this person 2 years ago, you let them have an animal. Yeah, 2 years ago, but my screening criteria changed on this date. Here is the screening criteria that you signed, and from this date forward, I am no longer accepting animals. Now, don't jump back and forth between applicants. Don't do that. But if you change your approach, that's okay. Just make sure that you have a revision date on there, and make sure that you're not kind of bouncing around trying to manipulate the situation. So that's it. That's what I have. That is the rental criteria information sheet. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. More than happy to help. Again, download this. I hope this resource has been helpful. Thank you once again for joining us for our screening or our rental criteria workshop. And this is Jason with the Landlord Launch, and we will see you next time.